Man delights me not, no, not woman neither, spake the Denmark Prince Hamlet to the hapless Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, a famous Shakespearean drama about a character who had rather famously opined, "What is Hecuba to him, or he to Hecuba, that he should weep for her? What would he do had he the rotive and the cue for passion that I have?" he asked. And at least that vacillating prince had suggested that he would have drowned the stage with tears. Yet his perfect self made mad the guilty and appalled the free in his image of self. But he conceded that he rather was but a dull and muddy metal rascal, wrapped like John of Dreams who could do nothing. And in a pandemic that had bound as many as 24% of even atheists trade, while sales of Bible, the most sold book in history, skyrocketed through the roof, beginning the pandemic involving a novel American coronavirus. Perhaps many have considered or even have been to that, shall we call, place, after suffering the slings and arrows of an outrageous fortune, taking arms against a sea of troubles, but not availingly so, but not for a certain promise that arrived at a wonderful time, a glimmer of hope delivered upon the first anniversary of the pandemic declaration by a person with whom you shared a common goal and mind. And if you might only follow those orders to the exact specification, if we all do this, if we do our part, if we do this together, by July 4th, there's a good chance you, your families and friends will be able to get together in your backyard or in your neighborhood and have a cookout and a barbecue and celebrate Independence Day. And many almost immediately had accepted that promise and dutifully had followed orders and accepted invitations to venture even to the gay capital of the world to celebrate the relaxing of restrictions imposed for public safety. And flocking from across the state, around the country, and even around the world, revelers were found before long, learning that they had unwittingly triggered the first known outbreak of COVID-19 among fully vaccinated people, as had been described in near real-time contemporaneity by Kay Lazar, a reporter for the Boston Globe, even though they had only been following orders. Hello, my name is Major Mike Webb. And 3 decades ago, as the former operations officer for all Army Strategic Counterintelligence in the continental United States, I was following orders. But this particular fact pattern probably, would not have come across my desk, or even to my attention, having been focused primarily upon the security of the active duty military, force projection and force protection. And from all reports, this was an entirely civilian affair. As an evangelical Christian of international notoriety, most would probably assume that an outbreak that had primarily affected over 1,000 gay men would not be even remotely in my concern. But as former Democrat presidential nominee Hillary Clinton had said, the Bible teaches us to love even our enemies. And some particularly intriguing facts of this outbreak had raised some questions that perhaps one only of my particular experience could have raised, having essentially served as a former biological warfare plan over 3 decades ago, and not knowing many who share that credential in a pandemic. And so the essential question for me was whether in a Christian love, going to church, doing the Jesus thing, and even a sense of duty, which has been a common word used in a pandemic, was it my responsibility to speak up, or simply elect the right to remain silent? Hence, but to say I chose the former rather than the latter, and have now commenced a rather controversial legal proceeding to compel a more rigorous investigation of this particular series of events, far away from where I am residing, both physically and also politically, ideologically. Particular series of events that had most adversely affected persons with whom, in an identity politic, would, to a mathematical certainty, be not my allies, but rather my most bitterest and fiercest adversaries. But at least one Negro preacher who couldn't sit idly by in Atlanta, with whom I had shared a spiritual mentor, had considered the parable of the Good Samaritan in his last address, and had posited that the moral question in that particular moment with the Good Samaritan is not what might happen to me, but rather what would happen to that other person lying on the side of the road if he had chosen the safe alternative, not to act, let others do so, and left them to their own. And so, for the next few moments, particularly for those who may not share either my religious affiliation and conviction, who might not find an ideological affinity, or who in a divisive and bitter partisanship not be inclined to even cast a vote in my favor, much less look my way, to lend an open mind, departing a reinforcing echo chamber, and simply to engage in active listening in that remote chance that some thought might be inspired thereby, to provide a freshened perspective to better assist those who you call your brothers, sharing a common spirit and common mind. Is that too much to ask for you to assist your friend in a manner? I went to night school, Professor, a very spatial night school, and they taught us all about coronaviruses. The early voting period has begun, and even though lawful authorities at the Federal Election Commission are wholly convinced that I am seeking election to federal office in a D+27 district, with the largest concentration of government scientists, where local reporters have opined that bookies would not lay odds on the Republican nominee Carla Lipsman picking up a seat, the probability being so far removed and out of reach to defeat the incumbent Don Bayer, but have nonetheless imposed a rather hefty fine, therefore, upon me and my campaign for an alleged violation of some administrative rule. It would be reasonable to assume that I have not even the remotest chance, not even appearing on the ballot, to affect the outcome of an election, and hence, empirically and credibly, I can present and assert for your careful consideration that I come not really expecting anything at all from you in return. Nothing in my hand and nothing up my sleeve, as petitions say. And in a pandemic that apparently still continues to baffle even the scientists, one might similarly consider that just to listen for a few moments, you have nothing at all to lose, save the sacrifice of enjoying a rather boring video, my contemptuous condescension, as well, for which I shall endeavor to attempt, at least, to be somewhat entertaining and appealing. Consider it at least a delightful retreat from concerns about inflation, war in Ukraine, where all are standing with and for, the melting glaciers in Antarctica that threaten the rise of seawaters, declining performance in public schools, and a litany of other issues that have this year even eclipsed a pandemic, for which the equivalent of a 9/11 continues to visit us with every passing week still. A concern particularly at The Atlantic, a progressive publication, Not necessarily a piece of reading that should be on my list, and for which scientists are currently tracking 2 new concerning subvariants, even more transmissible than the Omicron variant that had found at least 50 new mutations along its genome strain, and which some project may possess immune-evasive capabilities in gain-of-function, expected to fall during the holidays in the United States not long after outcomes of president elections have been decided, and which may come to mind again when those holidays come and restrictions may be imposed therefore. I went to night school, Professor. A very special night school. And they taught us all about coronaviruses. We have been following the Provincetown themed video series. One of my particular concerns had been not so much the explosive eruption of the outbreak, described as a super spreader event at multiple locations, which require particular criteria to assign it. While revelers had been enjoying in gaiety the La Vie Bohème that had been granted in a formerly restricted freedom, they had believed to be delivered like a promised land after voluntarily accepting the administering of free, shall we say, vaccines, although technically COVID-19 countermeasures, having been prepared without knowledge of infectious dose, but rather the significant clinical finding that there had been, to a statistical significance, no wider community spread. No wider community spread arising from what had been characterized by presumptively knowledgeable scientists upon whom we hope we can rely from the CDC as a highly transmissible virus, the most contagious disease that Dr. Walensky, in her 20 years of practice, would say that she had ever seen. Up there with chickenpox and measles, within all not, generally not the rate used for various reasons, of 8 or 9, which would of itself be rather amazing if you just consider the exponential potential of one essentially radioactive person passing this explosive condition to others, and so on and so on. Not just a game of tag your it, but tag your it and then others become part of the zombie army force, which logically, even given the span of time allowed for an incubation period, should not have presented such a defined and refined imprint limited to immediately identifiable clustered groups identified as large parties and events hosted for primarily gay men. And at least according to this report, the success story had been credited, not surprisingly, to the vaccines, which Dr. Siddle, by October 2021, had conceded to have suffered some disappointment, i.e., breakthrough infections, but rather to the masking mandates at indoor venues, not implemented actually until late July, long after the outbreak had begun around the celebration of Independence Day, as promised to be a day of freedom by the president back in March, and other public health measures like social distancing, which actually had been in suspension during the celebration of Pride Month in June at the gay capital of the world, Paradise, just before the sudden eruption had occurred in July, in suspension for a month from a pathogen that had actually been somehow contained in India from October until around early April, about 6 months, in India, and did not spread like the other variants immediately, and which to a reasonable person would be at least a sufficient reason to prompt an inquiry, particularly in a lethal pandemic that has been particularly brutal and unforgiving to the gay community, who tend to suffer more adverse outcomes than others with this particular disease. And I remind you that these are not my words. If you are gay, lesbian, transgender, prefer personal pronouns be given to you. We probably disagree on that political issue, but rather those who share a quite inopposite view regarding religious rooted morality are just opposed in political ideology to myself, and in an identity politics, in which I am not even really black, would more likely than not choose another political candidate than myself. And I simply present this quandary, this question, this interrogatory for your consideration, your careful consideration, with an abundance of caution. In a pandemic where, through evolutionary pressure, a single strand of RNA has conquered the world. And even Dr. Walensky has said, it's stupid, but human choices have not been our friends. Truly your bodies, and certainly your choice, not mine. And I promise myself that I shan't cry. For we are all big boys, so man up, as they say. Make like an ice princess and let it go. Take it to the Lord and leave it there if so inclined. I went to night school, Professor. A very spatial night school. And they taught us all about coronaviruses. Both Dr. Siddle, who had been the lead author in the follow-up study, After Action Review Report around October 2021, as well as the CDC, have allowed the scientific contribution of what has been described as genome sequencing, word that may be in your pandemic vocabulary, which had enabled medical researchers, even in the first imported case from Wuhan to the Seattle area, to go beyond that particular case and his 68 trace contacts to continue to track the virus, the equivalent of rifling marks, the fingerprints in ballistics for deadly firearms, to track its migration and spread. And with this rather advanced technology, the CDC and Dr. Siddle, in a true triumph of scientific technology, were able to determine that over 1,000 unique infections over the course of a month had originated from only one person, identified as being from out of state. For the virus would acquire new mutations just by introduction to another person, but it was this unique strain that infected all of these individuals with no variation. I went to night school, Professor, a very spatial night school, and they taught us all about coronaviruses. Now that may not, in your understanding of an evolving science of infectious disease, be of any very deep concern to you, even in a sense of communal responsibility to you, for which I pray you are not still buttressed in the assurance of an extra layer of protection by vaccines that even the CDC had acknowledged to have failed at Provincetown in their report, which you may or may not have read. But as a former biological warfare planner, that is of particular concern to me. And at least Dr. King said that we are all connected in an interconnected web of mutuality. Nonetheless, this sole source index case for a person who had somehow been identified as being from out of state, not from Massachusetts or even Provincetown, but not specifically identified, and who had been the sole source for this tragedy. Affliction of multiple gay men, individuals with a disease that has been found to result from millions of persons in affliction with conditions like long COVID, which to date alone in America finds over 1 million still unable to work, and which, contrary to many, especially in conservative circles, had believed to have created a natural immunity from a prior infection, which generally has for centuries been the case with prior diseases, even of a highly contagious and lethal variety. But, and through a process known even to ancients as Mithridatism, which you might recall from The Princess Bride, the iocane powder, upon which the whole idea of vaccines had been derived, used even by General Washington and the Continental Army to stave off infection from smallpox, 60% infectious by secondary attack rate, with a crudely developed vaccine comprised merely of infectious pus, appears not, upon examination of a large body of evidence by scientists, not just myself, not to have been the case, but rather to increase the probability of adverse outcomes from a condition for which at least 12% of those identified as having been infected, almost 100 million Americans in total, for infections as tracked by the CDC data tracker for COVID, to have been the victims of multiple reinfections. Again, a very significant finding. If only certain persons are currently finding themselves on a collision course with tragedy, contracting a disease that they get at particular events but aren't able to spread to the 7-Eleven or the hotel or wherever else they go, for which at least historically Provincetown is now, by at least 2 reports, on the danger list, and where one visiting might find a higher probability of waking up surprised again and again. And prayerfully, you don't want to be that guy playing Russian roulette with the virus. And in this particular instance, in July 2021, a month in which the Commonwealth of Virginia, I had an action to enjoin Governor of Virginia a month before from averting the risk of a similar event during the celebration of Pride Month, where all of the same conditions pretty much existed, had finally been given the opportunity for hearing in that July. A rather controversial case for which I had borne the brunt of criticism and been accused of being homophobic and everything else, only to be vindicated by the Provincetown outbreak. It had been determined to have hospitalized at least 6 individuals, from over 1,000 who had been afflicted, with an average age of just 41, predominantly male and gay, almost like a Gates and Dugas for patient zero that had been formerly vilified, but later vindicated as called the AIDS epidemic in the 1980s. But in this instance, who, like the zoonotic source, remained elusive and unknown, sparing him at least the guilt and the shame of one choir member in Skagit County, Washington, who had been identified as the sole cause of a super spreader event at a choir rehearsal that had been attributed to the deaths of at least 2 of his fellow choir members, and the Jewish man from Westchester, New York, who had been identified as causing the eruption of a super spreader event in which he had transmitted his virus to at least 1,000 people attending a worship service at his synagogue in New Rochelle, attendees at a funeral for a Holocaust survivor, and attendees at a joint bar involvement, a wax-on, wax-off coronavirus that only erupts when people are at religious events and gay men's parties, for which even today he has even gone to the press to proclaim his innocence. And if you are a gay man hoping to return, even fully vaccinated to Provincetown, by simple probability and science which relies upon replicability and reproducibility of results, may find you, again, to be a potential victim. And at least in the movies, the culprit always returns to the scene of the crime. As a former biological warfare planner, rather familiar with the ways in which biological agents spread and migrate, I can attest that I am not satisfied with the current official explanation, and actually had raised concerns about its migration very, very early in the pandemic to Senator Warner of Virginia, and still have yet to find an answer. And a reasonable person would desire to identify the true causes so as to be able to reasonably calculate prevention and mitigation measures, as is done even in the military composite risk assessment and safety management program, which has been time-tested and even has been promulgated in military regulations. And as a former childhood protege of a rather legendary civil rights and criminal defense attorney who had represented high-profile cases like Hurricane Carter, and even one person accused of violation of the Espionage Act, both who had proclaimed their innocence, for which he was willing to take up their call to the court, despite the controversy with what has been described even by your elected president as my unique passion that I possess. I have presented to the legal authorities in Provincetown, New York, not even my state affidavit, to prompt them to ensure that they follow the science for you, if only to prevent others later from also waking up surprised because somebody who was employed and had illegal to do their job and had failed to do so in negligence or motivated by some ulterior motive, which you have a right to know, but also have a right to remain silent. Your body, your choice, not my damn problem. Are we clear? I went to night school, Professor. A very spatial night school. And they taught us all about coronaviruses. Under the law, we have a concept that is a legal term of art, legalese, ascribed to presumptively rational men, which is described as a duty of care, from which those students in law may study in a course on torts or tortious conduct. And the basic rule in a very famous case cited by the U.S. Supreme Court in the 19th century, Cordova v. Hood, is that means amount to the ability to acquire information upon performance of due diligence, coupled with the duty of using that knowledge, are the equivalent of knowledge itself. And all of majority age are presumed to be adults in the eyes of the law. And one would not reasonably desire to be found in a state of negligence, weighed by the scales of justice and found wanting therefore. And to the affirmative defense of the still unknown sole individual, back in July of 2021, when much was not yet known that is now known about this virus, one might state that he was only following orders, had no reason to prompt him necessarily to expect anything other than a fun gay time at the beginning of summer in Provincetown, as he was told would be available by his president in March. One might argue that it was not your fault, his fault, their fault, for they had a promise from an elected president. However, elected and appointed government officials are assumed to have a heightened sense of duty as your elected representatives, with whom you hold a fiduciary relationship based upon trust. And under a case, Gwen v. U.S., there must be, in addition to such knowledge or approval, voluntary, willing, knowing, and intentional cooperation or agreement to cooperate before there can be any conspiracy. Had they made their decision for crime and prompting our present action in the courts, they have elected a dubious right to remain silent in our inquiries, raised on your behalf, even if not at your request. And maybe you don't care and don't want to know. You have that right to remain silent in a willful sense of bliss and ignorance and blindness. But for elected and appointed officials, even at the CDC, with a heightened sense of duty, where we all took an oath, are held to a higher standard, then states that mere acquiescence, or even silence, or failure of an officer to perform a duty does not make one a participant in a conspiracy, unless he acts or fails to act, omission or commission, with knowledge of the purpose of the conspiracy, and, or further, with the view of protecting and aiding it. A rule stated in a voting rights case, Lutheran v. U.S., relying upon a prior precedent in Burkhardt v. U.S. And with so much commotion occurring in Georgia and elsewhere, at least there are some who believe that voting rights are of the utmost importance. And this, especially for gay men, is a matter of life and death, with a condition that has been quite not friendly to them, which should be at least of a little more importance than a duty to vote in prime, or at least to inform that voluntary choice. However, for elected and appointed officials, there is a heightened sense of duty. And under the rules stated in U.S. v. Cali, a case from back in the days of Vietnam, the acts of a subordinate in compliance with an unlawful order given him by his superior are excused and impose no criminal liability upon him unless the superior's order is one which a man of ordinary sense and understanding would, under the circumstances, know to be unlawful. or if the order in question is actually known to the accused to be unlawful to himself. As the court said in the trial of an Adolf Hitler, the Nazi war criminal, the distinguished mark of a manifestly unlawful order should fly like a black flag above the given order, as a warning reading prohibited. Not mere formal illegality, hidden or handed, or the kind of illegality discernible only to the eyes of legal experts, but a flagrant and manifest breach of law, certain and necessary illegality, appearing on the face of the order itself. The clearly criminal character of the order or of the acts ordered, an illegality clearly visible and repulsive to the heart, provided the eye is not blind and the heart is not stony and corrupt. That it is the extent of manifest illegality required to release a soldier from duty of obedience upon him and make him criminally responsible for his acts. Or maybe 1,000 gay men being infected, 6 hospitalized with a deadly disease for which 23 million Americans find they are suffering from long COVID. 1 million unable to return to work is of little or no significance to you. But in that very infamous case, the tribunal decided, after reviewing the relevant evidence, that undoubtedly he knew the value of a tale about the administration of tonics to which he put his signature. And you have a right to remain silent. This briefing is up last time. That is all. Carry on. I've been to night school, Professor. A very spatial night school. And they taught us all about coronaviruses.
This advertisement was authorized by Mike Webb.
I've been to night school, Professor. A very spatial night school. And they taught us all about coronaviruses.